Hi, it's Tim Cole, and I'm glad you're joining us. We are currently in the middle of a course entitled How to Study the Bible. We are in week 5, so we've covered 4 lessons already. We're going to do a short recap for those, and then we're going to launch into week number 5, which is tools for understanding. So we began this study in week 1 talking about the importance of becoming a good listener. We didn't study tools, we didn't look at original language. The core that we boiled down the core importance of Bible study is hearing God. It's not in a gaining of all knowledge or all the details or memorizing chapter and verse. Those are good things, or can be good things, but knowledge puffs up. The spirit gives life, but the letter kills. So we started out with this concept that above everything else, we want to have a relational dialogue with God through his word. We want to hear him and hear what he has to say to us. We want to have an interactive conversation with God over the words that he has spoken through the word, the Bible. Pardon me. So started out talking about how important it is to become a good listener. Lesson 2 had to do with study styles, and layering those styles. There are 3 basic study styles that we enumerated. You're going to find a lot more, and other people will have different ones, and they can make arguments for those. But I've just distilled it down into 3. The first study style is inductive. That's where you and I jump into the pool of the Word of God and of God himself, and we just have this dialogue. Nothing else is with us. We don't have any floaty toys. It's just God and you swimming around in the Word, looking literally at the words on the page. What is actually written in this verse I'm looking at right here? What are the words? What could it mean? God, what was the intent of your heart? So this is taking the listening into the first layer of study, which is an inductive study. Still very relational, but it's also very subjective because it's just between you and God. And so we want to layer on top of that the deductive study, where we're diving into that very same pool with God, but now we're bringing other things with us. We have our floaty toys with us, if you will. We have those fun things called lexicons and dictionaries and concordances and Bible commentaries, and we pull these things, that historical documents like Josephus, where we pull in other outside source information to help clarify and bring into focus what God is actually saying to us. That's the deductive Bible study method. And we layer that on top of the inductive, and all of a sudden what was only subjective now becomes more objective, because we're pulling in other people in their knowledge to balance us out. Because remember, Paul said we have the mind of Christ. He didn't say you individually or me individually have the mind of Christ, but together we have the mind of Christ. So we layer the deductive on top of the inductive. And then the third style is collaborative. And this is where we really get out of subjectivity fully into objectivity, because now we're enlisting the help, the processing help of other people, not just words on a page from another book, but we're actually interacting with other people, like our pastor or a small group leader, or just a friend. We're passing off our knowledge and say, hey, I was reading this verse and this is kind of what I got out of it. What do you think? Or what have you gotten out of this passage in the past? And then that all comes into play, the inductive, the deductive, and collaborative Bible studies. The more you can layer, more accurate and trustworthy your outcome will be. That's a really powerful statement, very important to process. So you do that. So that's the second lesson, which is study styles and layering. Third lesson was basic interpretation skills. And we gave you 7 basic rules or principles by which you can interpret the Word of God. Really important. First one, just as an example, is that the Word of God is inerrant and infallible. It is the authority, right? It's true all the time, and it's the authority. Number 2 is kind of closely correlating to number 1, and that is, if the Bible is the only infallible Word of God, then we should use the Bible to help interpret the Bible. So what Paul brings up about the concept of righteousness in Romans, we should use to help interpret the concept of righteousness that comes up in Colossians, right? And so we gave you 7 basic principles by which or through which to process your interpretation of what's written on the page. These really come into play as you're formulating a message out of the outcome of the study methods, the study styles, and then next lesson, which is lessons in language, and those things then collaborate together, and we process all of our information that we've gathered through these 7 principles. That's lesson 3. Lesson 4, the last lesson that we covered was lesson 4, and that's lessons in language. And that's where we talk about the syntax of the destination language. So I'm an English speaker. That's my primary language. If yours is French, then you have French language syntax to discover through. But in English, there are sentence structure syntax that becomes important. There are parts of speech, verbs, nouns, prepositions. So we need to understand how the language is set up in the verses that we're reading, so that we can unpack even more of the meaning that might be hidden under the surface, or not necessarily hidden, but in a way requires a little more effort on our part to process those parts of speech. But not only the destination language, but the original language. Once we've done that in the destination language, we want to look at identify some of the key words, and then trace them back through a concordance and a lexicon, like Strong's, for instance. We look at the original language meanings, because sometimes the coloration of the original language word is lost in translation. So we just want to unpack the lessons of language and pull that digs up more material for us to process through our gold processing plan, if you were, so that we get to where we are today. We're going to talk about tools for understanding. We're going to talk about more tools that we can use and employ to make sure that we're digging out all of the ground that is beneath this verse, to process it well, so that we come out with all of the gold that we should come out with at the end of our study. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to look at the lesson guide for this lesson, and we'll process through together. So here we are. We've got our week 5 tools for understanding up. We just went through the recap, and let me read you this quote from Jeff Duntman. A good tool improves the way you work. A great tool improves the way you think. I love this quote. It's a really good quote. A good tool improves the way you work, but a great tool improves the way you think. I remember when Dawn and I, my wife, we had just been married. I think about 3 years in, we purchased our first house. And I could tell you the cost of that house, but it would be a little embarrassing how low it was. But honestly, it was a modest house, and it needed remodeled. So we began a remodeling project, and I remember going to a local lumber store, home improvement store called Busy Beaver on Chestnut Street in Washington, Pennsylvania. And I remember going in there, and they had these hammers for sale. They were nice and shiny. They were bigger than any hammer that I had. Now, my father had given me some hammers, and I was using them. They worked fine. But these hammers were a little larger, and they had a very soft red kind of, wasn't neoprene, maybe a silicone kind of base handle on them. So they were comfortable in my hand, a little bit larger than what I had in my repertoire at home in my toolbox, because this was a rough framing hammer. Now, who knew there were multiple types of hammers? But there are. And when I added that rough framing hammer to my toolbox, it really became my favorite very quickly, because it was large enough that it actually fit my hand better than the other smaller hammers, the finished carpentry hammers that I had. And it was heavier. So it was more balanced, and I actually was more effective using it. So it was the first part of this quote is really good. It was a good tool, and it automatically and immediately improved the way I work. But that tool did more than that. It was actually a great tool because it improved the way I thought. See, I realized that with that hammer, it only took me 2 swings to actually drive a nail all the way into the wood. Whereas my finishing hammers, it might take me 3 to 5 swings, because they weren't as heavy, it wasn't as long, and so it took more effort to drive the nail in. Why would that improve the way I think? Well, if it only takes 2 swings to get a nail in, now I'm already thinking ahead, and I'm gaining time, and I'm working more effectively and efficiently, not just in driving the nail that's in front of me, but now my mind is already thinking 2 steps ahead because I know I'll be there quicker. And so that red-handled framing hammer became a great tool for me because it not only improved the way that I worked, it improved the way that I thought. And that's really what we're going to look at. We're going to expand our knowledge of tools that are available for us in Bible study and studying the Bible. And I want you to understand that each of these tools has a specific kind of sweet spot, like that rough framing hammer had. Not every tool is equal. Each tool is really dedicated for a specific purpose. And if we learn the purpose and we use it for that function, we'll gain a lot, not only of improvement in the way we work, but it'll improve the way we think as well. So with that quote under our belt, let's begin. I want to first talk about translation. So the first thing, the first kind of really important tool is the understanding and the recognition that there are multiple translations. Pardon me. So in the world we live in today, we have the luxury of multiple translations. That was not always the case, of course, and many gave their lives because of their commitment to providing common tongue, common language translations of the Bible. The hierarchy of the church in the Dark Ages did not want the Bible in common tongue because they did not believe that normal common people could understand it. And it would be dangerous, right? But now we live in a day where there's multiple translations, and this is really important, and it really helps us in our Bible study. So it's the first tool I want to highlight. To do this, I'm gonna just go over the 3 basic versions of Bible translations. See, there are many different kinds of translations, and most translators and organizations that translate the Bible would concur with these 3 kind of large pots, large categories of Bible translations. And it's really a continuum from left to right and right to left. We're going to show and highlight how some translations are kind of a mix of both. So it's a continuum. It's not just a pot here, a pot in the middle, a pot on the right, but there's some translations that are actually in between the first 2 pots, if you will. But what are these 3 basic versions? They are listed here. There are literal translations, there are dynamic translations, and there are paraphrase translations. Literal translations, as the word would suggest, are the most accurate translation. They are highly regarded, widely regarded as the most accurate of translations because they translate with a rule from word to word. So one Greek word into the appropriate English word, or when it's specifically necessary, they might translate a Greek word into 2 English words because there's not simply one English word that adequately translates that single Greek word. But still, it's a word for word rule of translation. So it produces the most specifically accurate original language into a destination language translation. On the other end of the spectrum, we have paraphrase. And you might put, it's actually broader than thought for thought, which is the middle. We'll get to that in a moment. But this paraphrase is really about taking the concept, it's conceptual. The concept and being sure that the concept from the words of the original language is actually captured in the words that we choose to use in the destination language. And as a result, it's not word for word. It's thought for thought, but it's broader than that. It's actually concept to concept. And there's a little bit of leeway because it's a paraphrase. So if I said a sentence, green dogs don't exist, so do not believe anyone who tells you there are green dogs. Long sentence. If we played the game where I whispered that in someone's ear and then their responsibility is turn and whisper it, and then the next person, by the time it gets all the way around to me, what's going on in that circle is paraphrase. As much as we try and attempt to get word for word, that's a long sentence. We were not going to be able to do it. And so by the time it gets all the way back around in this year, how many of you know what happens? We've ended up with a very weird and wonky paraphrase. Sometimes the sentence doesn't even resemble the original sentence. Paraphrases are not that unreliable. Paraphrase translations, I should say. But they are paraphrases. It's being filtered through me as a translator. I'm blending what I'm getting out of the original, the accurate original, into a concept that I need to translate. And if I translate by concept rather than word, I might feel like I'm actually doing more justice to the concept that comes out of the original language. So it's reliable, it's just not as accurate in a word-to-word sense, all right? And in the middle, we have the dynamic translations. And this is, you might imagine, is a blend of both the literal and the paraphrase. So the rule for the dynamic is thought for thought. And it starts from the word for word, but is willing to give way to paraphrase or to an expansion of the word for word when there is no legitimately accurate word for word in translation into the destination language. And in those cases, it expands to more of a paraphrase, right? But it's a limited paraphrase. It's not all paraphrase. It's only limited to the ones that they feel do not actually, there's not a destination language or word that is a word for word translation. So we have three basic versions of translation, Bible translations: the literal or word for word, the dynamic, thought for thought. It's a little more loose in its rule, but it's still very, very accurate. And then we get to the paraphrase, which is the most loose, but it's still accurate. It's a section for section, a thought for a concept for concept in larger chunks. So they all aim to be accurate, but it's the differences are in their methodology. All right, so I'm going to scroll down a little further, and I'm going to reveal the many different variations of translations that we have today, and we're going to look at them, and they flow in context of this continuum. And so I just want you to notice that the KJV isn't exactly a word for word, but it's more word for word than the dynamic translations that are thought for thought, like an NIV. NIV is more of a dynamic translation than a literal translation. So in that regard, King James Version is probably more accurate in its literal sense of word to word than NIV is. In fact, that has become my reality. I've proven that reality out. There are times where I disagree with the actual words that were used in the destination language of English for the New International Version translation. I think there are other more accurate words that could have been used to make a more accurate translation from the original. But this is a continuum. And so the translations that are further left are more accurate word for word. Translations that are more right are more, they use more of the paraphrase rule to get the concept across as accurately as they can in a conceptual way. So they're still accurate, but they have different applications because they have different reasons for the way they've translated. And so I would say to you that the most accurate word for word translation of the Bible is probably the New American Standard Bible. Now the interlinear is the Greek for a New Testament over the English translation destination language. So it is the most accurate word for word translation, but most of us don't have interlinear because we don't understand Greek, and so it really kind of is irrelevant for us. So we'll bypass that and just say the New American Standard Bible is probably the most accurate word for word. I have friends who don't want to do any Bible study outside of the NASB. But there's a problem with the most literal word for word translations of the Bible into the English as a destination. And that problem is sometimes the wording does not actually flow very well and is clunky, and therefore can create a stumbling block in our understanding and our processing of the meaning of the words of the New Testament. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the NASB. It is by and large the most accurate word for word. Pardon me. However, it is not the most readable. So let me explain this in a little different way. The section on the left that is the most literal is probably the most used, and for good reason, the most used Bible translations for Bible study, for in-depth Bible study. And the reason for that is because they're word for word. They're more accurate to the original, word to word. The Bible translations on the left, let me include these over here, or on the right, rather, of the spectrum, are the most readable translations. And that's why these translations are probably the most devotionally read translations. Like you'll see over here, the New Living Translation, the Contemporary English Translation, or the Living Bible, or the Message Bible, which is the most paraphrased translation of the Bible. I personally use the New Living Translation as my favorite devotional reading Bible. It's the most readable for me. It's a little more accurate than the Living Bible and the Message Bible or the Contemporary English Bible, but it's not as accurate maybe as the New International Version, and it's certainly not as accurate as the New King James, which, by the way, is my favorite study Bible. So I use the New King James as my favorite study Bible, and I use the New Living as my favorite devotional. Now, yours may be completely different. You may be an NASB person and a Message Bible person for your, it's all personal preference. But understanding how they're translated will help you pick the right version of the Bible for your study, in-depth study, that is probably going to be different from the right version of the Bible that you might use for your devotional reading. I hope that is clear enough for you, and you understand that each of these Bible translations actually were translated with guidelines that make them better for certain applications than others. I'm going to scroll down the page here and just reveal what all these abbreviations, what they mean. NASB is the New American Standard Bible, AMP is the Amplified Bible, ESV is the English Standard, and so forth. You can read down through these. These are in your lesson guides. So hopefully that helps you understand why translations themselves, the varied kinds of translations, are in themselves tools. They will apply themselves better to certain circumstances than others. And having that understanding will help you pick the right kind of translation for the application of that you're using it for. Devotional reading, in-depth study, or kind of in between. Now, I had a couple, often it's asked about the NIV. Some have some very strong opinions, anti-NIV. And some would fight to the death for the NIV translation. I will tell you that in my own personal own personal experience, that I have found some places where the NIV just doesn't translate accurately enough for me. They mistranslate some words. In other words, they use words sometimes that actually lose some of the original language coloration that other English words would have captured better. Now, that's probably true of every translation, but I find it more true for me personally, the way I think and the way I process of the NIV version. And so, but it is much more readable than, say, the NASB or certainly the King James Version or even the New King James Version. It's just more of a modern language style. Also, you'll notice that the Passion Translation is not on here. It's not because I don't view it personally as a translation. I know that Bible Gateway has removed it as a translation because it has some issues. And the reason, by the way, it's removed it is that it's on the far right of the spectrum on the paraphrase version. But the difference between it and, say, the Living Bible or the Message Bible is that the Passion Translation is actually going through the filter of one translator and it's paraphrased through that one filter. Whereas the Message and the Living Bible, and all these other Bibles are translated through a group of translators. And so the paraphrase is more collaborative and therefore less subjective. Just like the Bible studies, inductive is very subjective because it's personal, it's individual. Then deductive, we're adding other individuals' opinions and understanding. And then collaborative, we're adding live, breathing people's opinions that are around us, that we're adding their opinion to the process. The Passion Translation is a single subjective paraphrase. And that's why, largely why, Bible Gateway and some others have removed it as a translation. I personally like Passion Translation, but it would belong over here in this and probably way over on this edge, because it is a subjective, individual paraphrase of the Bible. However, if you understand what it is, then it really still has a great value. There are ways that the Passion Translation has translated some Psalms, for instance. It talks about the presence of God. It's translated as the wraparound presence because of the concept that's found in the nuance of the Hebrew. Phenomenal. But it captures something that none of these other translations actually have captured, right? So the Passion Translation does carry a lot of value, in my opinion. So that's the first tool to be aware of, and that is just the basic kinds of translations that are available to you. Other study tools. Tools require attention. First of all, as we talk about these full tools, let me just give you two ideas that are important to understand when you're talking about any kind of tool. The first understanding that you need to have is that each tool has a value and purpose. If we use the tool for its designed value and purpose, we'll get the most out of it. Like that rough framing hammer, if I use it for rough framing, I'll get the most out of it. If I use it for finished framing, where I'm using finished nails with almost no head on them, I might not get as much value out of it. Likewise, tool to tool. If I use my framing hammer as a means of cutting wood, if I turn around, use the claw side of it and just chip away, it's not that I can't actually eventually cut a piece of wood into two pieces of wood. It's that it will be highly ineffective. And what would be more effective would be a different tool, a saw. So in like manner, these tools, we need to understand we need to value them and use them for the purpose that they exist, to get the most out of them. And number two, we must keep our tools sharp and in ready shape, sharpened, calibrated, oiled. And as we apply this to the biblical study tools, that really just simply means we need to have enough time in the seat with these tools that we feel like we can use them accurately, and we use them for the intent that they were created. Let me just a side illustration here. Do you understand that more people are injured through dull axes than sharp axes? Initially, that may not sound true, but once you understand the reason behind it, then you understand why it is true. You see, a sharp axe, when you swing a sharp axe toward a piece of wood that's setting up to be split into, that sharp axe, because it's sharp, it's going to more easily find its way into the surface of the wood. But a dull axe, particularly a really dull axe, could potentially bounce off of the top and off of the top of the wood and into your leg. So in that way, a dull axe, even if you hit the wood, it might splinter off really quickly and flatten out instead of going way down in, and it shutters off to the side and catches your leg. In the same way, it's just important for us to use these tools, learn to use them well, sharpen our axe, if you will, so that we're not injuring ourselves or anyone else by some heretical interpretation that we've derived thinking that it's accurate from one of these study tools. All right, so looking through these study tools, then first tool we have is a commentary. Most of you are probably familiar with commentaries. Matthew Henry's commentary of the Bible is one of the most well-known commentaries, but there are many, 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 many commentaries. Commentaries give the student another person's view of the context and meaning of Scripture. So when you're reading Matthew Henry's commentary on the book of John, he's going to give you his thoughts about the context of each verse as he goes through the study. And then he's going to, through that context, through his own lens, going to give you kind of his own concluded meaning based on the context and the actual content of the word. And that's really helpful. But it's also helpful to understand that it's Matthew Henry's idea and understanding of the context, and therefore it's his understanding of an outcome. So it's limited, like the Passion Translation in that way. Although we're not equating that with a translation, it's a commentary, it's his thoughts. Now, there are three basic types of commentaries that's worth mentioning. The first one is homiletical, and this kind of commentary is aimed at helping with lesson and message preparation. So if you're a teacher, a Bible teacher, you teach Sunday school, you teach Bible studies, or you preach, then homiletical commentaries are very helpful because they're geared at, specifically at, those who are building outlines and messages. And so you'll find that very helpful. And an example of this kind of commentary is the Preacher's Homiletical Commentaries. And this has 31 commentaries in the full set. The second type of commentary is an expository commentary, and it's aimed at a full progressive study of the word. It's not specifically aimed at those who are creating lesson plans or messages. It's just aimed at a full, comprehensive, progressive study. The example of this kind of expository commentary are the ESV expository commentary or the Expositor's Bible commentary, and there are many others. But this one's going to get more in depth into language, and it's a broader, more full commentary. Look at the word. The last commentary is an exegetical commentary, and it's aimed at the technical study. And this is going to be the deepest dive commentary because it's going to get into the technical language, going to get into more technical history and context. Examples of this kind of commentary are Baker exegetical commentary, the evangelical exegetical commentary, and many, many others. So there are three types of commentaries, but these give the student another person's view of context and meaning coming from the word. The second tool is called concordance, and concordances give the student a broad view of biblical word usage and density. Now I want you to pause there and understand what a concordance is. It gives, the student a broad view of biblical word usage and density. Those are two different things. Usage is the number of times that a word is used. So if you have a concordance and you look up the word blue, you won't find many examples of the usage of the word blue. They're in there in the Bible. But it'll be a low amount of a number of times. So if you look at a concordance for blue, you might find that it's found 48 times. I don't know what it is, I haven't looked it up, but let's just say it's 48 times for the sake of our discussion. So this word blue is used 48 times in the scripture. That's the amount of usage of the word. Then it's going to list every verse that word is used in, and it'll have that word highlighted in the verse. The reason it does that is because it wants you to be able to look at density. What is density? Well, let's say we're reading down through that list and we realize there's a lot of usage in the prophecy from Isaiah. The book of Isaiah, let's say it has 15, or let's say it has 20 times the word blue is used in Isaiah. Well, think that thought. If there's only 48 total, that means almost half of the usage of the word blue. And again, I'm just making all this up for discussion, but this is how a concordance works. It's going to show you usage and density. You might find out that Isaiah has over half of the usages of this word blue. What does that tell you? Well, not a great deal, other than, wow, if I want to understand blue and it's the way it's used in the Bible, I really need to pay attention to the book of Isaiah. So I want to look at all those references and then try to understand why the density of usage is really skewed toward Isaiah. And there is, I guarantee you, I promise you, there's something to that. something about the way that God is using Isaiah to prophesy, and the messages of Isaiah and the content of those prophetic words. That's why the word blue might be coming up over and over. Again, I've just manufactured all of that. I did not look that up. You look it up and go, wow, that guy's a heretic. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. Well, that's because I'm manufacturing this by way of an explanation for you, so that I can help you understand what a concordance is. It gives students a broad view of biblical word usage and density. These concordances contain an alphabetical list of words in the Bible with their density, the number of times used in the references of use, right? Examples here are Nave's Topical Bible, the CSB Concordance, Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, and more. The third tool are Bible dictionaries, and these offer students encyclopedic kind of topical entries about people, places, customs, doctrines, and details of the Bible. These are really good for those mid-level studies. So when you come across the verse and you identify a key word, you can look it up by that. You can look that word up in a Nave's Topical Bible, for instance, because everything in that Bible is going to, in that topical Bible is going to be alphabetical order. So you just look up, find that word, and then you can look at how that entry kind of explodes the meaning of that word usage in all of the scripture. So you're going to get a little bit of a lot of information, cross section of information about that word usage. I'm sorry, I'm looking at offers dictionaries that offers students encyclopedic topical entries. And this is really Baker's Evangelical Dictionary of Biblical Theology, or Eastman's Bible Dictionary. I'm sorry, I read this a line above. But we're talking about dictionaries. And if you look at Eastman Bible Dictionary, just like an English dictionary, it's all in alphabetical order, all the words. You'll find the same thing. Every word in the Bible is in an alphabetical order, and it's going to give you a cross section of really good facts. So it's a great mid-level study tool, if you will. Then number 4, we have these encyclopedias, which provide definitions, articles, historical background, customs, and language information to help build an accurate context for interpretation. So encyclopedias, printed encyclopedias that are just for world knowledge, have really gone the way of the dinosaur. You're only going to find those in libraries, and likewise, you're probably really now relegated to libraries for biblical study if you want to use encyclopedias, other than online usage, which we'll show you a little bit about in just a moment. Examples of biblical encyclopedias are the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia or Nelson's Illustrated Encyclopedia of the Bible. Number 5, we have lexicons. And lexicons provide students with meanings for original language words found in the Bible. Examples here are the Old and New Testament Greek Lexical Dictionary and Old Testament Hebrew Lexical Dictionary. But what I would like to say here is that the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance is actually a combination of a concordance, which is a broad biblical view of a broad view of biblical word usage and density, and a lexicon, which is the meanings of original language. Strong's Exhaustive Concordance is the marriage between a concordance in the first half of the book and 2 lexicons, or a lexicon of Greek and Hebrew, or Hebrew and Greek, in the second half of the book. So you look up the word in the concordance and you find the verse, and it's going to have a Greek or Hebrew word, a number there. You take that number in the back and you look up the Greek and Hebrew, and then you can discover original language and colors and context for the original language meaning. That's the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, and it's really a marriage between concordance and a lexicon. So there's 5 other biblical study tools that I would encourage you to get familiar with and become familiar with and use when it's appropriate. So let me move on to this online study. So I would highly encourage you to move online. I have moved almost exclusively to online Bible study. It's faster, and I can do more study. I can cover more territory more quickly. So we're going to look at online Bible study and then close with some considerations. So I'm going to share my screen, and differently in a moment, I'll share another screen with you. But I just want you to see this chart here. This is by far not exhaustive. You're going to find a lot more study tools online. I just listed about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 here. Nice biblical number. Some of the most obvious tools that you're going to find online, starting with Bible.com, Bible Gateway, BibleStudyTools.com, Blue Letter Bible. This is actually .org, not .com. Blue Letter Bible.org, BibleHub.com, BibleReference.com, and Logos.com. What I've done here is just try to chart out some of their benefits. So do each of these have access or give you access to different versions? What we studied in the beginning, this chart with the continuum of Bible versions or translations, do they give you access to those? That's the first chart here. The second, first column. The second column is, do they give you access to concordances like Strong's Exhaustive and like lexicons to allow you to study the original language? And I've marked in this column if they do or not. The third column is, do they give you access to helps like commentaries, dictionaries, encyclopedias, lexicons, and more? That's marked in this column. Do they offer paid versions of upgraded access to those things? That's here. You'll notice that there are two dollar signs here under Logos. Logos actually is probably the most robust Bible study tool, integrated. It has everything, but it is also one of the most expensive, a couple $1,000 actually to buy access into the full version. Here's an interesting thought. Do any of these give you access to an app so that you can look at them on the go through your mobile device? You can, of course, look at their website on the mobile version of their website, but an app is specifically designed to get more content on the smaller screens of mobile devices. So a lot of these do have a mobile app, and I highly recommend you. That'll be one of our last considerations, to go mobile. And lastly, do they have audio versions that are easily accessible? And I'll explain that in a moment. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and then I'm going to share another screen that I have some of these resources already up, ready to look at. And so here we go. This is YouVersion, or it's actually Bible.com. If you go to Bible.com, you'll see it's actually YouVersion. This organization is committed to creating easy access to the Word of God. They're a good organization to support. But you'll see some things up here. They have Bible reading plans. They got some videos. You can get the app on the top here. But if you just click on Bible, it starts in Genesis. It's very simple to use. It starts in Genesis 1 with the text of the Bible. If you look up at the top, this is the American Standard Version, the ASV version. So you can just pick the next. Oh, I want Judges, and I want chapter 13 of Judges, and it goes right to Judges chapter 13, verse 1. Or I don't want the ASV. I actually want the Amplified version. So I can just switch the versions just as quickly as that. Now I'm reading the Amplified version. They also have a really good tool here called parallel viewing. So I can click parallel view. Now I have two different versions of the Bible. Let's say I want to, pardon me, let's say I want to use my study version for me. That would be the New King James Version. And I want to compare that to my devotional reading Bible, which is the New it's the New Living Translation. So now on the left, I have the New King James Version, and on the right, I have the New Living, and I can compare them side by side. This is really a helpful tool. But that's basically what you're going to get when you go to Bible.com. It's a good entrance, but it's limited in its extra tools that it offers you. The next one I'm going to highlight is Bible Gateway. Bible Gateway is my preferred kind of go-to initial study tool of the Bible. At the top, you have a search box. You can search by book of the Bible, book, verse, book, chapter, and verse. You can get very specific. You have the same drop down. You can choose different versions that you want to actual search in, and you want to make sure that you're searching with the right version. A lot of times you learn the Bible in a specific version, and you're reading in another, and you're thinking about, you're remembering the language of the translation that you learned, But if you're in a different translation and you search for that particular word, it's not going to come up. So you want to make sure you're matching the version of the Bible that you're used to studying and searching the words that you can remember in that regard. So if I want to look up, for instance, I'm remembering a verse that has the word assembly or let's say assemble. I'm just going to use part of it. It doesn't have to be a full word. I'm going to search here. Wow, it comes up with 112 verses in the Bible that have some version of assemble. But I remember that the verse I'm looking for is in Hebrew. So I love this tool, BibleGateway.com, because on the right side it gives you the breakout of where these verses are and how many verses are in each book, Old Testament and down to the book. Well, I remember that the verse I'm looking for is in Hebrews, but I just can't remember the other verbiage to search for. So I'm searching for a partial word, and now it gets me to the right. Oh, here's the verse I remember. Not forsaking the assembling. The word is assembling. All I can remember is assemble. So I just use the partial and it still worked. Assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. And you notice that this is from the King James because I selected King James here. You can also look up topical references, language, all that's the other added tools that you can use for your Bible search. On the left column, you can look and see there are study tools here. And here's where on Bible Gateway, you get into more of the paid value-added things. I'm not going to take time to explore that. You can explore that on your own. Suffice it to say that the Bible Gateway is one of the tools I use a lot. One other thing I'd like to show you here is that you don't have to use the search box. You can just go, oh, I'm reading out of 1 Corinthians. So I click 1 Corinthians here and I just choose, oh, I'm in chapter 9. And it goes right to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Really helpful. They do have some other resources here, Greek and Hebrew content. You click learn more, and to get to the access to that, you have to pay to an upgraded version here. So if you're going to want to get it into the original language versions, then I suggest you use Blue Letter Bible, which I'll show you in 1 second. But before I do, notice these handy arrows left and right. So once you're in a passage, it's very easy to continue to scroll through to the next chapter just by clicking those arrows. All right, so if you want to do original language, I suggest blueletterbible.org. Before we get there, I want to show you one other general Bible study tool. It is called BibleStudyTools.com. It's probably laid out in the most intuitive way, whereas Bible Gateway has things on the side. It's usable, but this is really very clear in its menu system. You have drop-down menus for Bible study and tools. You can read different versions, Bible study reading plans. You compare translations. You can actually look directly at the interlinear Bible. Interlinear Bible, I'm sorry. And you would need to search here for whatever you search terms are. But let's just look at the Bible versions. I want to look at the English Standard Version, and it's right here. I can choose, scroll down. I want to look at 2 Samuel chapter 4, and now I'm right to this. And from here, now I can just change chapters, or I can change versions of the Bible right here, much like Bible Gateway. But if we go back to the study tools, I want you to look at the drop down. Here's the library: commentaries, concordances, dictionaries, and encyclopedia. All those things that we talked about, lexicons, they're right here. There are some devotional tools as well, videos, and right here you have audiobooks, really, really good things. So if we're getting really in-depth and we're doing some original language study, the last thing I want to show you is this blueletterbible.org. And I do want to remind you that, and I'll change this for later usage, but on the outline or that chart, it said blueletterbible.com. It's actually .org. Once you arrive here, just be aware that you can choose different translations, just like other Bible tools online. But if you choose anything other than King James Version, you won't be able to have easy access into the original language. They've married it like the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. They've tied it into the King James, the verbiage of the King James Bible. So if you want to do original language study, stay in the King James Version, and let's just go to Galatians we're going to go to Galatians chapter 5, because that's where we were in one of the last lessons. And if I just click enter, just to rehearse for you, I have all the verses in chapter 5 in vertical rows. And I can now click on this tools button and it opens up all these tools. I can look at dictionaries, and here are the main themes that are found in Galatians chapter 5 by wording. The word adoption's in there. Let's click this and just see. There's yoke. That's verse 1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made you free, and don't be entangled again in the yoke of bondage, right? Bondage is here, right? So you can have direct access. Let's just click on one of them. You can have direct access to Eastman's Bible Dictionary, just right there through the tools section, right? But we want to go to interlinear, and that's where we get into the original language. Left column is the English words. You'll see here right away we got 2 English words that are translated from 1 Greek word. So in the Greek, it's 1 Greek word, but in the English, it's stand fast. That's why it has this phrase designation underneath of it. Here is the parsing. If you click on this, it's going to open up another column. It's going to tell you how this Greek word is inflected. Again, you need to understand Greek and learn it as a language in order to really dive into this. It's going to tell you what the root word is, tell you what the Strong's word is, and you can click this to get to the original language or meaning. But it's going to tell you what the English translation is, and then here's the code. This is the parsing, but in long form, this is a verb that is presently active, and it's an imperative verb in the second person plural. Well, what does that mean? Let's go down to the next section. It's a verb. Click on that. Go down to the definition of verb, and it's a word or phrase denoting action. In the Greek language, this usually communicates 5 pieces of information: person, number, tense, mood, and voice. That's what this stand fast is a verb. Let's look at tense. It's present. So you can go all the way down through the verb, tense, mood, person, and number, and you can read and really get into the interactive basis of the Greek language for each of these words. So when I want to get to the original language, I want to click on the Strong's letter. It brings me into their basic format. Here's the transliterated word. It's not an English word. It's not a Greek word. It's Greek alphabet to English alphabet. Pardon me. And we come up with this transliterated word. You can pronounce it here. You can click this speaker icon and hear someone pronounce it for you, so you're accurately learning the pronunciation. One example of how this matters is a lot of people would look up the word power, and they would do a word study into the original and find that one of the words translated in English, power, is the Greek word exousia. But just looking at the pronunciation, a lot of people just in novice form, they just settle onto a pronunciation that isn't accurate, exousia. So you may have heard someone say, hey, the Greek word exousia means power, but that's not actually true. If you click the speaker, you'll hear the person pronounce it correctly, and it's exousia. So that does it really matter in your interpretation? Probably not, but it is part of the word study itself. You find the part of speech, you find the etymology for the word. Is there a root word? And there is here. This part of speech is verb, but it comes from, if I click on this, it comes from another word that's a verb. It's a prolonged form of steo. And so I would look here and say, this means to cause to stand or make to stand, to put or to set, to place. That's interesting. To make firm, later on down here, it says to make firm. So if I go back now, that's a root, and I go back to the discussion here, this means to stand firm, to persevere, to persist. But if I pull that word, and down here it says to be stationary. So if I pull the root in, which means to be set, to be placed, wow, to be stationary, that helps me understand what this actual Greek word means. Now I pull it back into the verse itself. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty where Christ has made us free. Stand fast, to be set, to be stationary. That helps me. All those colorations help me understand what is really the intent of God in the meaning of this verse. So that's how you can go through in a very basic idea and understanding and utilize this online tool that you will find in blueletterbible.org. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to just kind of wrap up our session by sharing the last part of our lesson in our lesson guide, and that is some considerations. I would like to encourage you to migrate to the mobile versions of these online tools, and specifically the app versions, because they allow for a better usage of the screen in an app form than just the mobile version of the website. You're going to get more content on the screen, and it's going to make more sense to you. Just take my word for it. It's true. Find an app that works for you, for your needs, and keep it handy on your mobile device. I can't tell you how many times that I've actually used my mobile app to preach from when I'm traveling overseas. Sometimes I certainly can't carry 2 or 3 Bibles. Sometimes it's because of the weight and space requirements, it's hard to carry actually one. And you always say, oh, how can you go overseas to minister without your Bible? Well, I have multiple Bible apps on my phone, and they're always accessible to me anywhere I go. So migrate to an app if you can, because it will always be with you. The second thing is seriously consider studying the Bible using audio Bible as one of your study methods. And here's why. Listening to the Bible allows you to consume larger segments at one time, such as a full book in one unified timeline. This gives you a great perspective on the flow and content of the book, the progression of the message, and the tone developed by the writer that you will not receive in any other methodology. It might take, I'm a slow reader, it might take me, let's say it takes me 15 hours to read through the book of John. I can listen through the book of John in 4 hours, maybe 4.5 hours, 5 hours. But I'm listening to someone else read it. They can read it faster, and I can actually speed that up maybe 1.5 times. And I'm listening to the flow throughout the entire book in about a third or a quarter of the time it takes me to read the whole book. I'm not suggesting you replace reading with listening. But what I am suggesting is if you only read, you're missing out on some very important qualities like the flow that's developed through the whole book. And when you listen to the whole book in one setting, I'm telling you, it was so enriching. I was so surprised at how much I did not catch by reading segment by segment, like chapter 1 day and chapter 2 the next day and chapter 3 the next day. If I did that, I got 21 days to read through John. But if I listened through it in 5 hours, wow, I got a completely different view. Invaluable information that I wouldn't have gotten any other way. So I strongly urge you to consider using the audio versions of these Bible translations as one of your tools in your study belt. And those are, again, listed in this last column. Bible Gateway has them, other online tools as well. And the last thing I would just say is that Strong's Exhaustive Concordance is perhaps the most valuable study partner you will ever have. Learn to lean into the original language as much as it is appropriate. You don't need to study every Greek word in a passage. In fact, a lot of the definite articles like the and a, you're going to find translated out of Greek into English. And guess what? I can stand up and say, hey, this Greek word the, can you guess what it means? The. So you don't need to waste your time going into looking under every stone, under every word translated, but highlight those keywords and take the time, spend the time, invest the time using Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, either in old school physical form or online through one of those online tools, and take the time to invest in the original language enough to pull out those color pieces that may not have translated really well, but once you've looked at the original language and then pull them out through the etymology of root words into the actual Greek or Hebrew word that was used, and then pull all that meaning back out into the English translation, now you're going to have a very rich understanding of what was intended by God through those passages. So we're going to finish our 5th lesson. I want to thank you again for joining us in this course entitled How to Study the Bible. This is 5 lessons now, and our next time we'll finish with the 6th lesson. Of course, we offer a 7th study lab, but we won't have any notes for that. We'll give you at the end of lesson 6, we'll give you the assignment that everyone's going to do together. And then we're just going to all kind of collaborate and share our outcomes from a 2-verse study, Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, on the 7th week. So we will only have 6 video versions, 6 video lessons, but with the encouragement out of the end of the 6th one, do a 2-verse study and do all of this together. Put it all together, inductive, deductive, with language, lessons in language, Bible interpretation principles, with these study tools, and then distill it down with what we're going to talk about in lesson 6. So thank you again for joining us. Look forward to next lesson.